Hi everyone, how are you lot? It's good to see you. So assembly, no lining up, no shuffling quietly in to sit down, year by year, group by year group, but we're going to manage to do all of you at the same time. So welcome to the assembly. Let's see if I can get the kit to work. Hopefully I'll be sharing my screen with you very soon and we'll run the assembly. Hope everyone's okay. We'll have an assembly at this time every week. We're looking forward to welcoming you back to Robertsbridge. Hope everyone's okay. We heard good news this week, didn't we, from Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, where she told all of us that actually the Easter Bunny is that is an essential worker, the Easter Bunny, which is a great relief, I think. So hopefully we'll still be able to have Easter egg hunts on Monday. So I'm just going to move myself around a little bit. Welcome. So hashtag on Twitter every day at 2, 4, and 6, all about well-being, all about managing anxiety, all about looking after each other, all about learning, all about connecting with all of you. We'll be giving you advice as well as we go along, and some really exciting news about some webinars that are happening just after Easter. We're going to be looking at how to support your learning to make sure that while we appreciate it's really hard to continue to make progress without your teachers, we will be giving you some tips and advice on how to make sure that you maintain your learning at its current level and don't lose some of the skills you've already got. So obviously we're living in tough times. We're going to be focusing on today's webinar assembly on coping with anxiety. That's for all of us really, and we'll be publishing this at 11 o'clock on Friday. So happy Friday, everyone. So we're living in extraordinary times. What an amazing month it's been of incredible news. News that all of us will have found quite distressing and difficult at times for lots of reasons. We might be worried about relatives. We might be worried about what it's saying on the news. We might be worried about what we've seen on social media. We're worried about our friends, worried about our GCSEs. Huge amounts of change we've had to cope with. We're living in extraordinary times. And we're going to look today at what's happening in our heads when that kind of thing happens. Because our brain will have found that information really upsetting. So our brain builds our mind, and when our brain experiences any kind of uncertainty, we experience anxiety. So what it's doing, the brain, day in, day out, is looking out into the world to try and work out what's going to happen next. And when it struggles to do that, when it doesn't know what is going to happen next and experiences any kind of uncertainty, in our minds, we feel that as anxiety. And we'll have seen a lot of that in the last month. People hoarding loo roll and rice and pasta, people being perhaps around you a bit more shouty and a bit more stressy, not managing their emotions as effectively. And that's because there's a part of their brain that's looking out into the world and going, oh no, I don't know what's going to happen next. And whilst we've been given lots of good information by lots of scientists, and we're in probably the best place we've ever been as a species to cope with that uncertainty, we've still got those ancient bits of our brain that are going to make us feel anxious. So we're built not to be happy, but to survive. And that means, unfortunately, that bit of our brain that spots uncertainty and makes us feel anxious is always going to be on. So it's always going to be on. So we've got to be prepared to manage those feelings of uncertainty. And in fact, the resting state of a human brain is to be mildly irked. What does that mean? It means that actually great cavemen that were not completely satisfied or happy with life were much more likely to get off their backsides and go and find stuff. So if you found yourself to be a bit grumpy, a bit lacking in motivation, a bit uncertain, that is the resting state of the human brain, to be ever so slightly dissatisfied. And this is a period of time where there's lots of anxiety as well. So what should we do about that? Well, it's really important that we should be aware that our brain is much more biased towards negative information than it is towards positive information. Our brains are sticky for negative information. They're like Velcro for negative information and Teflon for positive information. So we really need to be aware that that is where our brains might go if they're just left to idle on their own. And in fact, one of the ways that that low bit of the brain makes us pay attention to anything that might be uncertain in the environment is it gets involved in something called cognitive distortions. And we're just going to watch a quick video on that now.
Today, we're going to talk about ATs, also known as automatic thoughts. They're those destructive and unreasonably negative thoughts that you have that make things go from bad to worse. Avoiding ATs feels as impossible as avoiding red lights when you're running late. You're going to hit one or two, or every single light from your house to work on that morning that your report's due at 9 a.m. and your boss is already on the edge and you might just get fired and then get evicted and... See? Automatic thoughts can pop up and escalate as easy as that. Regardless of reality, ATs are the things that help you build a couple of red lights up to an Armageddon-scale catastrophe in a matter of seconds. Today on Wellcast, we're going to show you how to manage those harmful automatic thoughts with healthier, rational ones. And we're going to use our triple R exercise. You are going to record, rationalize, and replace your ATs. But first, how serious are ATs? A study at UCLA shows that people who got caught in cycles of automatic negative thinking became clinically depressed, self-critical, and less successful in both their work and personal lives. According to Dr. Glenn Scaraldi, these negative, disordered ATs fall into 13 categories, all of which take a toll on your mental health. Here are some of the categories. Assuming or mind reading. Like when you are sure someone is mad at you, even though you haven't spoken to them just because they walked in and didn't say hi. Shoulds, must, and oughts. Those are the insane demands that we make upon ourselves in our quest to be impossibly perfect. The fairy tale fantasy. Where we demand an ideal for our life and decide that anything less than that ideal just isn't fair. Overgeneralizing. Nobody likes me. I always ruin everything. And finally, catastrophizing. When you take a little problem and turn it into a big, terrible, life-changing event. How do we stop ATs? Good question. And the shorter answer is we don't.
We can't stop automatic negative thoughts. They are going to crop up whenever our brain is feeling any sort of uncertainty or anxiety. And what are they about? What is the brain doing to itself? It's really the emotional circuits trying to get attention of other circuits, particularly the cognitive circuits behind our forehead and our prefrontal cortex. So this is an attention grabbing mechanism to flag potential problems. And the way the brain flags those problems is by imagining all possible terrible scenarios to get our attention. So if we find ourselves in a difficult space, and in this moment when we're all having to cope with massive amounts of change, and as much as we all love our families, I'm sure being cooped up with them can certainly be stressful as well. And we can only go outside once a day. And some of us live in houses where we haven't got very big gardens or even gardens at all. So that is tricky. So we might find ourselves experiencing more cognitive distortions. So if we do, it's really important that we notice that those cognitive distortions are happening. And we don't just agree with the assumption or the catastrophizing that our brain's doing. And if those cognitive distortions keep repeating, it's really important to capture them and write them down. And that's what this grid's about. So one way we can cope with difficult moments is capturing the cognitive distortion. Write it down. Writing it down will make it seem a lot smaller, and then categorize it. So if we've got a catastrophizing thought that someone was meant to meet us online for a game and they haven't met us online, that means they don't like us and they're games of people. Write that down and then categorize it as a catastrophizing thought. Ultimately, what's the core problem? You're worried about connecting with your mates, and that is a natural worry. Obviously, much more difficult now when we're social distancing as well. But, you know, the core problem is that. So build in some time to connect with them and, you know, just check in with them and do whatever it is to make sure that that concern goes away. And if it continues to crop up, then talk to somebody else about it as well. Our brain is designed to reach out to other people to seek some support as well. Okay. One of the other cognitive distortions we might find ourselves experiencing from time to time, and I'm sure you've done this, I certainly have, is blame. But blame isn't actually about solutions. You might blame your mum or your dad or your brother. It's not about solutions. It's about discharging discomfort and pain.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I'm a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house, I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And the first, a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: "Damn you, Steve." Who's my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends, and the night before he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because I can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back like at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all, like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the no thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
Blame is just a cognitive distortion. And it's really important to remember that blame is a cognitive distortion. Okay, so we're now going to look at how we can respond to more difficult times by thinking about our brain in a different way. So our brain has not been designed to deal with the 21st century, certainly not a pandemic and all the complexity we're facing at the moment. It's been designed to deal with an environment that no longer exists, the African savanna 800,000 years ago when our ancestors first arrived. So that means that there are systems in the brain, ways of responding and thinking that are designed for that environment. And in the modern world, that can create psychological suffering, just in the way that we've looked at cognitive distortions can upset us as our internal thoughts get our attention and try and make us believe them. We shouldn't believe everything we think. We should weigh it up. We should consider it. We should maybe write it down if it keeps cropping up. We should share it with somebody else. We should also make sure that we're aware of some of the ways that our brain can amplify those experiences of psychological suffering.
The human mind has evolved to think in such a way that it naturally creates psychological suffering. You see, back in the Stone Age, 200,000 years ago, life was pretty dangerous for our caveman ancestors. So if a caveman or cavewoman wanted to survive, their minds had to constantly be on the lookout for things that might hurt or harm them. And if that cave person's mind wasn't good at predicting, spotting, or avoiding danger, what happened to her? The default setting of the caveman mind was safety first. And we in the modern world have inherited this. Our modern minds are constantly warning us of things that might hurt or harm us. The caveman mind says, watch out, there might be a bear in that cave, you could get eaten. Watch out, that shadow on the horizon might be an enemy from another clan, you could get speared. Our modern mind then does worrying, predicting the worst, avoiding anything that scares you, anxiety in all of its different forms. Back in caveman days, you survive an encounter with a bear or a wolf, then it's useful to replay it. It's useful for your mind to go over the events and remember what you did to survive so that you're better prepared for next time. But in our modern world, we go over and over painful memories, dwelling on them, reliving them, even when there's nothing useful to learn or the lesson has been well and truly learned a long time ago. In the Stone Age era, as a caveman or cavewoman, you have to fit in with the group. If you are alone, you will soon die. So your mind compares you to others in the group. Am I fitting in? Am I contributing enough? Am I following the rules? Am I doing anything that might get me thrown out? Now, in modern life, we're always comparing ourselves to others. But the problem is we're no longer in a small group. Our groups are enormous today, and we carry with us devices that constantly feed us images and stories of people all over the planet. This constant comparison ramps up our fear of being judged or rejected or not fitting in or just not being good enough. The caveman mind tells you you need more food, you need more water, better weapons, better shelter. The cave people who thought this way lived longer and had more offspring. Unfortunately, in the modern world, this manifests as greed, dissatisfaction, craving, wanting. It's never enough. I need more, more, more. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, these Stone Age thought patterns are intensified by the sheer pace and complexity of modern life. Our frantic existence, rushing from task to task, that never-ending to-do list. So, when your mind starts doing this unhelpful stuff, as all minds do, remember it's not defective or abnormal, and it's not deliberately trying to make your life difficult. It's simply doing the job it has evolved to do, trying to keep you safe and save you from pain.
Really kind of quite helpful to know, isn't it? But if we leave our brain to just run itself, the mind we get to live inside might be focusing on some of those negatives. As it spots uncertainty, we feel anxiety. So it's really important to build our awareness about those things. So one of the things we can do when we're feeling anxious and we're finding things difficult is to notice those feelings. So when we've gone from feeling okay to feeling anxious, noticing, first of all, that journey from one to the other. Second of all, perhaps trying to spot what it was that triggered the anxiety. And we could say to ourselves, instead of saying, I am anxious, we could put one step between us and that feeling. We could say, I am noticing that I am anxious. That one step gives us a little bit of breathing space between us and the feeling, so we can think and feel our way to some solutions about it, rather than just, I'm anxious, I'm angry, it's your fault. I am noticing that I'm anxious. I wasn't anxious and now I am. And we can begin to kindly and curiously explore that. Try that. Try, I am noticing that I am, rather than simply feeling the experience. If our brain's able to name the emotion, it's able to move on from it. And the other thing we should do, particularly when we're feeling anxious, is to use gratitude and kindness to remind ourselves of all the good things that we've got each day. So, you know, it's not great, we're in lockdown, we don't get to see our mates, but there are positive things. And reminding our brain of those positive things is really important, because as we've seen, it can be quite negatively biased. Okay, so how do we move from a situation where we react to a situation where we respond? We're maybe not as calm as she is, but we are much more responsive rather than simply reacting. Okay, well, one of the big problems we face is the fact that there's so much uncertainty. And we've made this special video to explore why there's a particular amount of uncertainty around the coronavirus. Greetings, Neuro Ninjas. I thought I'd do a special little video, not about GCSEs or A-levels, but just about what's currently happening and the way the brain might respond to it. So, like being anxiety aware as a Neuro Ninja responding to coronavirus. Okay, so there's no epidemiology in here. It's all kind of neuroscience. But I will post some links to really good bits of information that I might mention in a second. If you remember, if you've attended any of the seminars, in the second seminar, Being Anxiety Aware, we talk about the bit of the brain at the back of the brain at the bottom, the limbic system, but deep in there are two lobe structures called the amygdalae. Now, their mission is to look out into the world. They get all sensory information first. Everything goes through the amygdala first, sight and sound and smell and everything. And then it gets passed up to the prefrontal cortex just behind the forehead, where we get to make kind of more kind of thoughtful cognitive decisions that we've weighed up. So the amygdala gets all information first, and the thing that really upsets our amygdala is things changing in the environment, and particularly where we don't know what's going to happen. So uncertainty is something that our ancestors really needed to be careful of, because if you're not certain where the food's coming from, if you're not certain where the predators are, that's going to cause you massive issues in terms of survival. So that triggered anxiety. Uncertainty equals anxiety, and the 21st century, as we talk about in that second seminar, is full of anxiety. Because of the uncertainty that's out there. Uncertainty, normal uncertainty, like GCSE results. How am I going to do? The results in the future. A-level results. How am I going to do? The results in the future. Which course am I going to go on? What job am I going to do? The results in the future. So you can't do anything about that uncertainty. So they're kind of prickly problems is what we talk about, prickly problems. So the coronavirus, 8 billion people on the planet with a new strain of coronavirus that none of us are immune to, spreading through society, that creates a massive level of uncertainty for the amygdala. So you're going to notice people around you being much more grumpy, much more stroppy, a bit more shouty, maybe a bit more scared. And, you know, it's really upsetting, and it's really important that we as neuro ninjas respond a bit differently to our anxious minds. So think of our amygdala as a little kind of child, a little baby that needs soothing, because it's pre-linguistic. And the bit of our brain that calms it down is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex uses experience and cognition and the information about the world to kind of calm down the amygdala. So how to respond to the coronavirus as a neuro ninja? The best solution is to, first of all, acknowledge that it's going to make all of us feel more anxious because there's a lot more uncertainty. And whilst I think the advice we're getting from government and all the scientists is really good, it doesn't stop the amygdala's response. We are going to feel uncertain. So acknowledging that we're going to feel uncertain and being kind to ourselves at that point and saying, actually, I'm going to be more anxious because there's more uncertainty. And then my solution, you know, because I'm a slightly anxious person, my solution, and I think one you maybe should adopt, is to really get really good quality information for your prefrontal cortex to respond to. And then that bit of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, soothes the amygdala, calms it down. If you remember, we talk about the fact that throughout our lives, the prefrontal cortex calms down the amygdala. And basically experience means that we feel discomfort and our prefrontal cortex experiences life and calms the amygdala down. So we need to load our prefrontal cortex up with good quality information. And the best quality information is the scientific evidence we all know as a species now about epidemiology. There are very fantastic modelling. There's lots of detail about the impact and effect sizes of certain kinds of processes, social distancing, all the different things that government advisors are talking about. And I would highly recommend that you spend a little bit of time every day just kind of responding to the prickly problem of the coronavirus by going to really good information sources, not information sources that are designed to make it dramatic because they need to get more views because they're carrying advertising, really good quality public service information. There's fantastic videos on YouTube. There's some great stuff put out by the BBC, but also other providers as well. And it's really important that we feed our prefrontal cortex with good quality information. So I'm going to post on my Twitter feed, Instagram feed and Facebook feed lots of good links to go to, and spend maybe 10 minutes a day just filling up your prefrontal cortex with good quality information, because I guarantee the more information the prefrontal cortex gets about what's going to happen, because we understand epidemics, we understand epidemiology, we know what we need to do. And while there's still some uncertainty around the coronavirus because it's a new virus, we are in the best place ever that the species has ever been in to understand that. Scientists across the world are sharing their data. We're learning new things every day, and that information is guiding our
that's
processing.
a lot of detail about how we might use our prefrontal cortex to calm down our amygdala. And to finish off, really, just to say, for the next week or so, before we meet again for our next webinar assembly next Friday, first of all, to say Happy Easter. Don't forget the Easter Bunny is an essential worker, so hopefully you can have Easter egg hunts in your houses, and maybe in your gardens if you've had them, But this week, try and notice, be aware of those moments when you become anxious. Notice cognitive distortions. Use that sheet that we showed in the middle of the assembly to help you manage those cognitive distortions. And rewatch the videos just to begin to understand that living in a human brain is not always a happy and joyful experience, that we do have some strong negative emotions, and they're trying to tell us important things about the world. And it's really important that we notice those negative emotions and respond positively to them. Anyway, it's lovely to see you all. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care and happy Easter.